Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Degreed podcast. I am Max Wessel, co-CEO of Degreed, and I am delighted to welcome Fiona Leteney, the senior analyst at the Fosway Group that covers learning systems. Recently, Fiona has published a new 9-box grid covering the learning systems market, and we wanted to welcome her on to talk a bit about what she's observing in the market over a series of podcasts and really proceed sort of together. So Fiona, welcome.
Thank you, Max. Great to be here. Great to have this conversation with you.
Fiona, Fosway has a very unique perspective on what's happening in the market. I wanted to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about what makes your research and your perspective different than others as you look at the learning systems market.
Right, yes, thanks for asking that question, Max. So Fosway focuses on Europe and EMEA, and that is the main area, although we are aware of what's going on the rest of the world. But any of the vendors that appear on the 9 grid have to have headquartered customers in Europe. So that's the first thing. But the other thing is that we look at enterprise size corporations. And so if you look at the bottom level of the grid, that's maybe at 1,000 employees and then goes up. But so it's large enterprise right at that top area, which is where Degreed is on the grid. But the other thing I think that is quite unique is the longevity of those of us kind of in the organization. So Fosway's been going for over 25 years, and I've been in the learning systems market since it started over 25 years ago. So we have the experience, and we have seen particularly the large enterprise just develop, because back then, when we first started, it was only large enterprise that could afford to implement any learning system. And that the size of the organization is gradually getting lower and lower and lower. But our focus is on that larger enterprise, or enterprise particularly.
I mean, you've seen a lot of change in the market over the course of the last decade, to be sure. We've spent a bunch of time talking about it. I'm interested in what surprised you most in the last year. Certainly, it seems the pace of change may even be accelerating, but I'm fascinated in what you might have seen that sort of unique in the last year, last 2 years.
So yes, maybe the last 2 years, the titles, the headlines haven't changed a great deal, but the nuggets of information as how things have developed or impacted the industry are beginning to change. So that I think the 3 big headlines are about the economic climate and the impact that that's had on the buyer as well as the vendors. It's also on AI, obviously. I mean, that's the biggest talking point over the last couple of years. But also skills. We've been talking about skills for quite a number of years, and it's still a challenge. But there have been, within each of those big headlines, there are nuggets of things that have actually been happening that are a little bit more surprising.
You started with a bit of the economic challenges and the headwinds. Certainly, there's been a lot of uncertainty over a period of years. We had the pandemic, which caused folks to digitize really, really quickly, but also simultaneously on the backdrop of not knowing whether the market was just going to fall apart. I think we saw some risk and uncertainty coming out of that, and the recovery actually proved a lot better than we thought it was, and I think we're back to a point of uncertainty again. When you think of how people are behaving in this unique moment, like what is surprising, right? What are the sort of nuggets or kernels of truth that you say, hey, I wasn't sure I would have seen this, because we've certainly lived through lots of economic headwinds before. What's different this time around?
So I think, as you say, COVID had a massive impact and increased the digital learning. We kind of moved forward. We were talking about probably 5 years at least in terms of that digital transformation of organizations. And actually, the fortunes of a lot of the vendors, there was quite an uptick there. Everybody needed to get a learning system. During the pandemic, everybody had to get their training online. And as we kind of pointed out last year in the 9 Grid report, the sugar rush was over of that digital transformation, and it got to the point where, okay, everybody's got a learning system that wanted one, so now what? And I think the market has slowed down quite considerably. But it has also meant that in those different sections, and we have the sort of 3 bandings on the 9 Grid, different things are happening in each of those sections that you could call out. And also what was happening, which we did a report on the middle of last year on large enterprise learning, is that there was some consolidation of vendors, and particularly Cornerstone was buying all its competitors around it. And so how did the market deal with that? And how, it was quite interesting to see that actually some of those large enterprise organizations, in trying to deal with the fact that there was now only one vendor at that large scale, was now looking at, well, who are the competitors that we take into an RFP situation? And those are likely to be HCMs, but also it's really only at that top area that it is that a buyer can afford to pay for multiple systems. And so there is likely to be specialists that are being taken in at that level, so that there is some innovation being added into the systems, and just how they were monitoring that innovation in terms of they had to justify it, and still have to. That's the point now in the economic climate that we're in. Though any sort of decisions on, either buying extra modules within a system or adding a new system in there, they've got to see that there is value, and that's so important just at the moment.
So, I mean, it sort of teases this one issue, which we've seen fairly regularly: the fact that people bought through the pandemic sort of out of short-term urgency, and maybe didn't understand the solution they were or the job they were hiring a learning system to do. Do you think there's more maturity now that you're seeing in terms of that thoughtfulness? Like, here are the outcomes I'm trying to drive from a workforce perspective, um, that is guiding people to look at whether it be sort of a learning platform that is integrated, a specialist vendor that's coming in. Do they understand, do buyers that you're talking to understand the ROI they're trying to aspire towards?
Again, it depends at what level you're looking at, and at the smaller organizations, the sort of hundreds of employees, then they bought quickly. And then, I mean, to be honest, you only really get to know a system when you're using it. Going through an RFP situation can be quite difficult, because you can be wowed by, how what it does and what the vendor is talking about. But it's only when the devil's in the detail, it's only when you get to use it that you realize. And so absolutely, as people start to experience the systems, they will find out whether or not they've bought well or not. We often talk about that there is that second renewal point is the danger point for the vendors, because the renewal point we're talking about, usually maybe it's 3 years when they need to renew the licenses, and that second renewal point after 6 years. So we've still got a way to go if they bought it in the pandemic. Maybe it's coming up next year. The renewal point, have they bought right, or do they need to move on? So that's at a sort of a lower level. I think those that are large enterprise are likely to have had all the systems, but it's a question of, were they being used to the full advantage at that large enterprise level? I mean, I'm thinking particularly a couple of areas that really kind of came into their own. One was the extended enterprise, so that had always been done in the classroom, but that had to be brought online, and so that was quite a new start for often not L&D people. It could be operations, it could be marketing, it could be the IT teams that were trying to train their customers on their systems. But the other area was maybe in the programmatic area, where a lot of the big programs for leaders were done in hotels in, Las Vegas or Dubai or whatever, and that needed to go online as well. So there were certain things that we've needed to gather a little bit more information about what we're doing. Some could go back and have done, but others, and I'm thinking maybe about the programmatic, some areas that they decided to go back into the classroom, but other organizations, some of the big organizations, and I'm thinking of a pharmaceutical, where they basically realized that for sustainability and for their carbon footprint, then going back to airlifting everybody into a central hotel somewhere is not going to be viable. And actually, some of them have even got their bonuses sort of matched up against their carbon footprint. And if they go over, then there's a problem. So it focuses the mind when you start to look at it from that perspective.
When you think about the work that you did to collect sort of insight for the 9 grid this year, one of the things that I'm interested in, you just talked about people buying for a problem and then now getting to the point where they're evaluating, did I buy right? Did I understand the process, and having some options? I may go back to the way that I was doing it before. I may embrace this moving forward. You also talked about best of suite and best of breed and the need for, like, the economic headwinds of the market driving for potentially some consolidation, right? Fewer vendors, less cost, these types of things. What are the spaces in the market where you feel people are coming forward saying, I feel like I have bought right and I made this bet and I'm seeing the ROI from it, coming out of the pandemic? So what are the categories, as you were doing the 9 grid research, that were interesting and exciting? And maybe what were some of the categories where people have questions, like maybe this isn't the most uniquely positioned or the most ready for prime time, as folks look at their stack?
Quite often, if again, sticking with the large enterprise, there are new organizations that might, in terms of their learning experience, it's actually really pretty good, and it's looking great, and it looks better maybe than a legacy system that they've got, and so they bought it to kind of go on top of that. But sometimes, because one of the challenges of large enterprise, and they're global, they're complex, lots of different regions, and when you start to have to configure for all the different rules and compliances within the various regions, then you start to see that some of the less mature vendors don't necessarily understand how to configure for all. And I did hear one, and it might have been, it was during the research this year, one particular vendor admit that there was a particular country they couldn't roll out to because they weren't configured for that country. They dealt with everybody else, but they needed to wait until they changed some of the configuration so that it would work within that country. So that country got left for a while before it was rolled out there. So those are the sorts of things that we were beginning to see as well, because it is complex, and the large enterprise, they're sophisticated, and there is a need for a depth of functionality in those areas that not all necessarily have, and or even realize as well.
Wonderful. I mean, super insightful from the perspective of thinking about the needs at different levels and, what are the ultimate differentiators of being able to deliver against the promise. Um, Fiona, I just wanted to say thank you. I know that we'll rejoin and continue this conversation in a bit, but my three takeaways from this first piece of the conversation, um, the headwinds kind of create opportunity. So there's lots of economic uncertainty. However, the fact that folks are consolidating or evaluating their choices again gives our customers from a degree perspective or from a market perspective the opportunity to get crisper in terms of what is their ROI focus. The second bit of this is that there absolutely will be a role of specialist vendors as we think about those large global experiences. And I was interested to hear in the sort of programmatic side of the world and the extended enterprise side of the world, both two things that hadn't shifted digital prior to the pandemic, now finding their footing as folks determine to leave things there. And then lastly, obviously, through this whole change, the make and break of who emerges successful and who doesn't is often comes down to things that we may not talk about in marketing materials, but
Mm.
can you configure, support, and deploy in a way that meets large enterprise needs? Because it's not just about the marketing demo or the web marketing properties. It's about can you meet the needs of a large population of employees who happen to sit in one country or another? So
Yeah.
very, very grateful for that insight and looking forward to the next conversation.